speakers here today. I hope you enjoy their stories. Our first speaker is Jay Alvarez. He, him, is a Latinx queer trans man that works as a psychotherapist at Oswego Wellness, seeing a variety of age ranges, identities, and orientations. Jay has also volunteered for the Youth Outlook for a few years, and due to that work, developed the love of giving back to his community, and offering a safe place for all LGBTQ individuals. Jay.
Why is everyone so far away? Oh my God, it's like school, just hiding in that. So I want to thank you all for having me. This is definitely, that video really hit here. So I felt it was necessary for me to come here. First of all, can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. All right, so I want to start by recognizing every single one of you that's right here. Every LGBTQ plus member, every ally, I'm very thankful to be in front of you right now. So today is very bittersweet. We're dedicating it to every life lost, every spark that has been extinguished. However, we're also celebrating the life they lived. I also want to continue, having us hold hope strongly and proudly, like we have always been doing so. I know that with the events happening right now, things feel very difficult. We can fall under a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. And I will say that is not new to us. And we still are here. So being transgender is a struggle. Some don't believe we are valid. Some reject us. And also, a lot of us do love you, do love me. We're not alone. Our community has been strong for hundreds and hundreds of years. And we have been strengthened with the adversity we have faced, and we're stronger and prouder every single time. Sorry, so I just also want to say I'm actually getting nervous public speaking, but I'm here for you guys. I even, I took off my Crocs, put some dress shoes, so you'll see me trying to crack some jokes here to lighten the mood. So I want this to be one of continued days that we hold on to our resilience, our courage, and one lesson that I continuously give every client that I see, regardless of orientation, of identity, of age range, and that is that pain is inevitable. It is human. Suffering, though, that is what we make. So I wanted to share my story a few years ago. And by a few, I mean, I don't know, quite a few. I'm only 32 though, so it still feels like more. I experienced the kind of suffering that a lot of my trans siblings, go through. I struggled with a lot of need for resilience and a lot of anger that I had to be resilient. So I'll tell you a little bit more about me. All right, so as mentioned, I am Latinx. I grew up with two immigrant parents. I grew up poor, low socioeconomic status in Los Angeles. As far back as I remember, I faced adversity. Whether it was just very volatile family dynamic, a lot of trauma, a lot of trauma for years and years, most of my childhood actually. And I remember in my adolescence feeling so lost, feeling burdened, feeling angry, feeling just every bit of depression that I could experience, feeling anxiety, feeling trauma, like the PTSD that was popping up. I remember not being able to go to school because getting out of bed for days seemed just really difficult. I pretty much missed a lot of my high school years, I would be honest. I was always that kid with potential. However, I was also someone that didn't know who they were, whether they were them or a consequence of all they experienced in their life. I struggled for years, and I think that I was very, very low. I did not love myself. I did not feel loved. My family dynamic definitely didn't show me that growing up, and it had nothing to do with my identity as an individual. I just happened to be in the crossfires of their own struggles and their own trauma and their own history and knowledge of what a family system was. However, at 18, I actually remember stepping. I used to live right in front of a church. It was a Catholic church, so it was pretty inside. And I remember just begging to have strength, to keep going. I did not want to stop. And it was so painful, internally, externally, to just exist. And I'm totally being honest about this. I really did feel like somehow some weight was lifted off me that day. And I decided I needed to change my life. I got a GED. I went to community college. I felt so comfortable in who I was. Well, slowly, bit by bit. It's when I first actually went to a GSA alliance in my community college. I knew I was different. I didn't know in what way. It was the first time that I ever said out loud. At that time, I identified. I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm gay, because I was still perceived as a cis, female. And that itself, I remember I was shaking, and everyone else was clapping and feeling so good, and I was just like, dang. This means something. It means that I am accepting that society itself will not accept me. Even in Los Angeles. I mean, if that's one of the most bluest and most liberal cities. However, I grew up in a very traditional Mexican upbringing where, Catholic guilt and a lot of sternness, not a lot of acceptance. However, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna live my life. I'm gonna join the military so that way I can, I'm gonna come out right the day before I ship out. That way they can't tell me anything. And I did. And surprisingly, my dad that once said, oh, if you're even bisexual, like, I don't think I could see you. This was in middle school. My sister joked around about it, like, Dad, what would you do if I was bi? It's like, oh, I would take a weapon. I'm not going to give specifics, and I was just like, oh, I'm terrified now. So before I shipped out, I told my dad, okay, well, I identify as gay. And surprisingly, he accepted me, which really threw me off, and he started crying. And he told me that his fear was for those outside that would hurt me for being gay. And that was honestly the deepest and most heartfelt conversation I ever had with my father. So I shipped out because as an individual that struggled most of my life. I wanted to prove how strong I was. And you know what? 1% Army strong, that is what they tell you. And guess what? I went through training. I was Army strong. I was in the best shape of my life. I felt good. And then I went to my first duty station in Virginia, and I felt still motivated, still strong. I worked in the emergency room. I was an Army medic because, of course, I always wanted to help. That was kind of what I did most of my life. I wanted to protect, and that's what I did. And then I started suppressing who I was because there's still a lot of hatred towards anyone of our community in the military. So no one really knew anything about my personal life, and I avoided talking about it. I was just the professional. I was Alvarez. I was a medic, and I did what I needed to do. After a year, though, I started feeling the depression creep back in because I was alone. I did not have community. I was getting burned out, and I ended up saying for the first time, I think I need help. And that same year, when I was 19, no, more like 20, I went to the doctor. I'm like, hey, you need to help me here, because I don't know how I'm doing this. I ended up spiraling. I ended up inpatient in a hospital because I could not feel safe with myself. I could not feel safe at all. I did not love myself. I truly felt alone, and all this anger started piling up. I didn't understand why I physically had to deal with the physical pain of my trauma if I was not the one that caused that. And I went through this process of, they sent me to an intensive outpatient program, and I still was so willful and angry about having to deal with all that suffering that I was causing myself. And I realized something. I realized that when I was in the groups and I met others that were like me, and I don't mean that in terms of identity, I mean that in terms of people that suffered. I felt seen. I did not feel alone. And that was something that was like peeking at my idea of, okay, this is nice, this is something warm. However, that was still not enough. I was very close not to be here. In front of you, I was super, super close to the point where I woke up in an ICU and I was just like, whoa, that was very dark. And I guess I went to sleep. And I woke up and I realized, I wanted to live. I realized that I deserved, that child that was small deserved to be loved, deserved to live. And if the world itself was going to go against me, well, I was going to be the advocate and that strong individual for that little Jay. So I did not know how. I did not know, things were not easy still. I was in the military until 2015, so I was in there like 3.5 years, almost my 4 years. I got medically discharged. And during this time, I was also in a very, very unhealthy relationship, marriage actually. And when I got out of the military months later, I actually had to escape that marriage because of my own safety. And I left with a backpack. Just one backpack so that the person would not suspect that it was anything other than me going to school. I put in, I remember my military, my certificate of achievement signed by Obama. I was like, yes. My pictures of the military, a laptop, just some basic toiletries, and I decided I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna go back to LA. And I honestly rebuilt my life in LA from a backpack. My mother helped. I will say she was not the best mother, but she was a loving mother. And she was there. I remember getting her Target credit card, and we were going to get me shirts and pants, and you know, it was an interesting experience. I was still trying to figure out how I was going to piece together myself. And I had this idea like of how broken I was. Thankful for the VA. I saw this amazing psychologist, Dr. Kristen Leishman. I will always remember her because she saved my life. She was the first individual that unconditionally and non-judgmentally saw me, listened, did not judge me for times I did not want to go, and I was expecting anger and disappointment, and never with her. This 30-something-year-old cis woman became this maternal influence I needed in my life, and I started healing. I started this program, like doing this program called dialectical behavioral therapy. I started coping skills, and I realized like things would not be easy, and I realized that happiness itself was not a constant. I had this idea that joy and happiness was always up. Everyone felt this way. Everyone felt happy. Everyone felt loved or some which way that I did not understand. And I realized that was not the case, that we all struggled. I went back to college. I decided after not passing chemistry twice that maybe nursing wasn't my thing, and I went to psychology. After fulfilling my transfer requirements, I decided to come back to the Midwest. Everyone always asks me why I'm here and not in Los Angeles. So I went to Aurora. I got my degree in psychology. And while I was doing that, I remember taking this class, and it was on gender and sexuality. Now, as I mentioned, I still had this perception that I was just gay and just masked. You know, I was very comfortable in my clothes, kind of dressed similar to how I dress now, and everything itself had no hints of any femininity because that did not feel right. It made me kind of sick. And I learned more about my community and what it meant to have this open, just universe filled with possibilities of who I was. And I was, for the first time, able to explore that and understand who was I. I volunteered at Youth Outlook, and I love Nancy. Oh my God, I volunteered since I was in my undergrad, and I started sitting in a circle with all these youths and of all identities, orientations, and I saw their strength, and I was so inspired, and I was like, wow, these kids are going to school, they're facing these, hardships, and they're still here smiling, they're still here supporting each other, and unafraid of being themselves. And I was like, wait a second, is that the case? What is it that I'm afraid of? And I realized how I identified. Initially, I was like, tiptoeing, like maybe I'm not binary because, I don't want to tell people I'm fully trans. I was terrified because that label itself carries a lot of fear of how you will be treated. If I'm not passing enough, what will happen to me? And I had a great support system. I had great friends. Youth Outlook, amazing. I decided to come out. In 2021, I started taking testosterone for the first time. And oh my God, it was the best. I mean, there's some things, that we won't discuss. There's some unpleasant, my smell changed. Okay, I was a little more smellier than usual. And I was so firm and so happy. And yes, I will say that there were still obstacles. There really was. Oh my God, how many obstacles were there in front of me to just try to reach this light at the end of the tunnel that I knew I had. And that was, I wanted to help others. I wanted to be there for those children that were like me, those adolescents that suffered like me, and let them know, hey, you're not alone. This will pass. If I was able to get out of the trenches, so can you. So I graduated with my bachelor's, and I had a friend who was a social worker. She told me, hey, why don't you apply for a master's? I'm like, no, I'm not smart enough. I can't do it. I'm also really depressed. Like, COVID was still going on, and I decided to take a jump. Like, this person with a GED, I remind you, I had a GED. Applied to Loyola. I'm like, I'm not gonna get in. I got in. And I continued my process of trying to be a clinician. I continued, my first year internship was at Youth Outlook, and I don't know, I started acquiring and learning and feeling so happy within myself and just radiating that, this joy. Because yes, I had stumbles, but I did have glimmers of hope. I had glimmers of light. I had people around me. I had my community. And I graduated in 2022. And since then, I have still continued to see obstacles. There have been times where I'm just like, wow, this living is not easy. And I wouldn't change it for the world. I really wouldn't. I became a therapist. I worked in an intensive outpatient program as well with adolescents. I saw a lot of trans, a lot of non-binary adolescents that felt similar to how I did. And I identified. And I won't ever forget a parent telling me during a graduation of a non-binary kiddo, like, you saved their life. And I swear I cried. I really did. I cried. And I held this father and we had a hug, and I was just like, wow, this is worth it. This is worth everything. So now, as I move back to private practice, I get to do that every single day. I have really cool clients that are, trans, they're non-binary, they're adolescents, some are, adults. I've seen like this guy that's like closer to my mother's age, and I was like, oh, what are we gonna connect with? But again, I hold on to the message that pain is something we all experience. And it's something we all can overcome, depending on our perspective. Whether we see it as a curse or we see it as a reason to demonstrate how resilient we are, or to be able to appreciate the light that we do get in those moments day by day, those smiles of random strangers, or whenever you feel very spiffy in a cool outfit, that is my light. And that's why I felt it was important for me to come here and tell you guys that. Tell you all that, y'all. I'll use that term, sorry. And you're not alone. I can say that I don't know pretty much any of you, and I can say that I love you. I can say that there are a lot of us clinicians that do love you, that want to be there for you, and Youth Outlook is also there, so they're really cool. And I just want to just share that story of someone that was in the shoes of a lot of our trans siblings that are not here with us anymore. That's all I got. Thank you.